Here we have the RX 7900 XTX here at Tech Yes City, finally in for benchmarking and review. However, before I get into the full-fledged review, I wanted to check out two games in particular, and that is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 as well as Call of Duty Warzone 2, where before I did this video and before I did my testing, I noticed a lot of other reviewers were posting massive gains on the 7900 XTX, in particular compared to the Nvidia counterparts, especially the counterparts of a similar price point. Take for instance the RTX 4080, where the 7900 XTX actually outperforms it by quite a big margin. However, when we compare that to other titles, the RTX 4080 is coming with similar performance to the 7900 XTX. And so this got me thinking, why exactly is this? And some of you may be wondering this exact same question. And to answer this question, we have to go back all the way to 2005 when Call of Duty was first designed, and it used an engine from a studio called Infinity Ward. However, this engine wasn't known to the public until 2009 at an event called E3, where IGN interviewed the developers and they talked about the IW 4.0 engine. And this Infinity Ward engine was designed exclusively for the Call of Duty series. However, the latest iteration of this engine, the IW 9.0, does spell good news for AMD Radeon gamers. However, why exactly is this? Let's get into the details.
You want to get yourself a cheap, legit Windows 10 Pro Key license? Then today's video sponsor SCD Keys has you covered. For as little as $14, when you use that coupon code BFTYC, you can get Windows activated right now. Links in the description below.
Welcome back to Tech Yes City, and first up here, we're going to show you a side-by-side comparison of the 7900 XTX versus the RTX 4090 in Modern Warfare 2. Now, this is done on the multiplayer in the shipyard, which is a 6 versus 6 multiplayer battle, and it's actually quite enjoyable and you can get into the action very quickly. But one thing I noticed about this particular benchmark was that the 7900 XTX was coming very close to not the RTX 4080 but the RTX 4090, and in fact it was within 10% of the performance while still maintaining good 1% and 0.1% lows. However, when we scale it down to 1440p as well as 1080p, the 7900 XTX does perform even better at these lower resolutions. Now, the first question you may be asking yourself is, why does the 7900 XTX perform so well versus the Nvidia counterparts? And the second question you may have is this an indication of what's to come in the future with the 7900 XTX? Is it going to get these big performance gains like we've seen in the Call of Duty series versus the Nvidia counterparts with other games that are going to be released on PC? Though tackling the first question, it isn't just the RX 7900 XTX that performs well in this title. In fact, if we go back to the 6800 XT, this is beating out the RTX 3080 by quite a significant margin too. So this then leads us to believe that this game engine is favorable to AMD Radeon graphics versus Nvidia graphics. Now, this can go back to the way the textures are optimized, and in fact Call of Duty has been known to have hit or miss style optimizations when it comes to its texture packs. And a very particular example of this was Call of Duty Black Ops 2 versus Call of Duty Ghosts. I preferred the former Call of Duty Black Ops 2, where the playable experience was excellent and it was a smooth experience. But when I moved over to Call of Duty Ghosts, it didn't matter if I had the highest end system, this game just simply stuttered all the time. It was actually a big mess, especially when it came to the multiplayer experience. And then I looked deeper into why exactly this was, and Black Ops 2 used a blending mixture on the textures to blend two tones together to reduce the demand put on the graphics cards themselves. However, moving over to Call of Duty Ghosts, there was a major change here done where they were using real-time HDR lighting effects and removed this blending fixture, which then resulted in heavier loads on the GPU and what I believe was the main cause of the stuttering in this game. So ultimately, whether a GPU performs well or not doesn't just come down to the drivers or the GPU hardware itself. A lot of it falls to the game developers and the way they've implemented the engine in their game. So now that we fast forward to 2022, Modern Warfare 2 and also Warzone 2 share the same engine and that they're using the Infinity Ward 9.0 implementation. And this engine in itself does favor the AMD counterpart cards. And this was actually based on the same engine that was used in 2019 on the original Call of Duty Warzone. So in other words, if you have an AMD graphics card, you are going to get better value for money in terms of rasterization performance than the Nvidia counterparts. Now moving into the second question, is this an indicator of things to come for the 7900 XTX? Can you expect massive gains in other games going forward? Now the answer to that question is going to be yes and no. And the yes part to that question relates back now to the Call of Duty franchise, where the developers have stated that they're all going to be using this same new engine going forward, which means that AMD graphics cards will perform better than their Nvidia counterparts, especially at similar price points going forward. So in a nutshell, if you play Call of Duty and that's the only title you play on PC, then you are going to extract a lot of value going with an AMD graphics card versus an Nvidia graphics card. However, going back to answering the part where we said no going forward, this is only one engine in the land of PC gaming. Developers can even take an engine and it's a completely different thing to another game that's used the same engine, where it's up to developers to make their own versions of things like physics, textures, and also lighting, and these effects come down ultimately to the game developer, and in the end, is that going to favor Nvidia or AMD? And then this ultimately boils down to then comparing graphics cards in multiple titles and seeing the performance differences within those titles. And then also, for instance, giving out a total game average, which can then give you guys an indication of how well the cards will perform in general. So on the flip side of the equation, there will now be games that, just like Call of Duty favors AMD Radeon graphics, there'll be games that favor Nvidia with their GTX and RTX graphics cards versus the AMD counterparts. However, it is impressive to see that the 7900 XTX, for instance, in Modern Warfare 2, or when we benchmarked Warzone 2, it was beating out the RTX 4080 comfortably and actually coming closer to that of the RTX 4090. However, I did want to further examine this game and see if there was anything, for instance, that was more optimized from the drivers themselves or AMD's control center. And I did change settings in the AMD Radeon control panel to see if this would affect performance and drop the performance of the 7900 XTX, as well as disabling things like smart access memory and above 4G decoding. And the end result was still the same. The 7900 XTX did perform extremely well, even with these optimizations disabled versus the Nvidia counterparts. So with all that aside, this then brings us down to the final question, and that is, which is the better card, the RX 7900 XTX or the RTX 4080 or even the RTX 4090? And this ultimately, for me personally, depends on the game you play. I know, for instance, as a PC gamer, I spend the majority of my time playing 2 or 3 games, and I might play a new game that comes out, and if I like it, I'll continue playing that. But it has to have, for me personally, multiplayer replayability. If it doesn't have that, I'll clock the game, I'll finish it, and I won't come back to it. And now with Warzone 2, that is a very popular multiplayer title, so it's going to hold a lot of value for people who go on the AMD side of the fence. But there's also a lot of other titles out there. For instance, Apex Legends is actually playing very similar between the RTX 4080 and also the 7900 XTX. And there's also countless other games out there that play within a similar field of the 7900 XT versus the RTX 4080. And with that example aside, I think this is what PC gaming is about. Don't just look at the overall benchmarks, look at the games that you prefer and see if that graphics card's going to be offering you, ultimately in the end, the best value. Now, I do have some good news with the RX 7900 XTX, and that is, after spending some time with it, playing some games and taking it through its paces, I had no problems on the retail release drivers if you were a gamer. As a content creator, I do have some gripes with this card, and that is, for starters, AMD, what's going on with the capture card compatibility settings? I'll pull up some B-roll I took when I was trying to capture the BIOS settings. The 7900 XTX in my capture card, it was just giving out blurred lines like I was making some kind of cinematography movie, and that was the only shot that I needed. But actually, I needed to show the audience me disabling the rebar feature for my B-roll. There's also no option to install Relive if you're on a Ryzen 7000 series GPU. Well, actually there is. You've just got to go into the BIOS and disable the iGPU before you install your AMD drivers. So there are some bugs that need to be ironed out, but it feels like a lot of these bugs have existed now for years, and AMD need to address those bugs. Where if we go to the Nvidia side of the fence, as a content creator, there are just no problems whatsoever when it comes to recording my videos. If there is a problem, it's rarely a driver issue, and even if it is a driver issue, Nvidia fix it really quickly. This is what I've noticed. Also on top of that, Nvidia do have a very solid value add in that their ray tracing performance is leaps ahead of AMD's, and they've also got other value added features like DLSS, which I prefer over FSR, and also they've got the reflex technology in games, which reduces latency. And if you're playing popular multiplayer titles, you'll definitely want to have your latency as low as possible. But when it all comes down to it, a lot of people I think were expecting the RX 7900 XTX to perform like it did in Modern Warfare 2 and also Warzone 2 across practically every game out there, and come a lot closer to an RTX 4090 than the RTX 4080. However, that just wasn't the case. This is a particular game engine ultimately that favors AMD Radeon cards, just like other games will favor Nvidia graphics cards with their engines. And so to look back at AMD and say that they failed with the 7900 XTX, that all depends on your expectations. I do believe AMD messed up big time when they were touting the rasterization performance as basically 1.5x to 1.7x in their 7900 XTX announcement. I think this was a big downfall for them because they essentially promised something that they weren't delivering on when this product was released. Now on the Moore's Law is Dead podcast, after seeing this presentation, I was openly speaking about roughly a 1.3x gain. That's just because I wasn't believing what AMD was selling in that presentation. However, 1.3x to 1.4x in performance over its previous generation RX 6950 XT isn't all that bad. It's actually still a decent card. I just think that AMD failed on overhyping their card and then ultimately under-delivering, and this has a big effect on damaging the brand, especially when people were really looking forward to that 1.5 to 1.7x gains. So going forward for AMD, I think a lesson to come out of this video is that the card is pretty solid, but transparency is everything. When you're delivering a presentation and you're promising 1.5 to 1.7x gains, and then on launch day you're not delivering that, that can really upset a lot of people, especially in a world where we've got much tighter financial conditions going forward and much more global uncertainty, especially when it comes to the macro global economy. And this is exactly what is needed more rather than less, and that's transparency. And you guys know here at Tech Yes City, I'm always transparent with you guys. I always have been, and I always will be going forward because I value that, and I value your thoughts and opinions on everything I do here at the channel. And with that aside, do let us know in the comments section below what you think of the 7900 XTX, especially in Warzone 2 as well as Modern Warfare 2. This title was really interesting, and I decided to go a little bit more in depth and look at this title in particular. And also with that said, I will be releasing a video looking at power consumption, and then we'll get on to our full-fledged review comparing the 7900 XTX in particular to the RTX 4080. With that aside, we do have the question of the day here, which comes from Super Jankovic, and they ask, what's the idle temperature with the 7950 or the Ryzen 9 7950X? And the idle temperatures for me, at least on default settings, was around 38 degrees to 40 degrees. And this was with ambient temperatures done anywhere from around 22 to 26 degrees. I actually forgot the ambient temperatures at the time of testing. Anyhow, hope that answers that question. And also one more thing, if you guys are wondering about the power consumption numbers, the idling numbers especially, I saw some concerning reviews out there stating that the idle power consumption was very high for the 7900 XTX. The retail driver seems to have fixed that, and I was getting very good idle power consumption numbers in the test that we were doing here with a 4K 120Hz OLED. Anyhow guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, then be sure to give us a like, and also if you stayed this far and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content, then be sure to hit that sub button, ring the bell to get the content as soon as it drops, and I'll see you in the next video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.